access the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
And welcome to the podcast of OA, episode number 121. I'm your co-host, Myron Rumsey, and this is the dawn of a new day. So we are welcoming our new co-host to the podcast of OA. Welcome aboard, Phil Bova. Phil, welcome to the show.
Welcome. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thanks for having me, Myron. It's a pleasure to be here. Really, it's a true honor.
So to give everybody kind of a little bit of your secret origin, how long have you been a Green Lantern fan?
I've been reading stuff. So I'm about 44. So I've probably been reading Green Lantern since the early 80s. That's when I really started getting into them. I did fall off the map for a while and kind of quit reading for a little while. And then, like everybody else, I kind of picked it up with Blackest Night. Was when I really delved into it heavy. And I've been dedicated to every issue ever since. And then I just started going through some backtracks and putting in the fillers as I go along. So,
what about Green Lantern makes you a fan?
Honestly, I don't know if you've ever read The Philosophy of Green Lantern, Green Lantern and Philosophy. It's a really good book, co-written by Mark White, this his philosophy professor, and it's interesting because I had a conversation with him one time, and he asked me kind of the same question about what made me a Green Lantern fan, and I said, the thing about the constructs is what makes them most iconic. I mean, it takes a certain amount of an individual to maintain composure and construct something out of pure will, no matter what it be. It doesn't matter if it's Kyle Rayner and his artsy stuff or Hal Jordan and his planes. It's just to come up with something in any given situation on spur of the moment instead of using just brute force like Superman. It's kind of makes it a noteworthy individual to do that.
Yeah, I always thought it was interesting that it wasn't so much about physical strength as it was his mental and soulful strength.
Exactly, and that's kind of what I picked up on with these guys. I mean, any number of the Lanterns. I mean, as far as they go, you got different alien origins, and I mean, you can only imagine what a lot of these guys are thinking about because they don't think about the same things as you and I would think about, a milkshake or a baseball bat. But it's just the sky's the limit with your imagination, and I feel like with the Green Lantern Corps and any member of the Rings, it's like they have unparalleled vision. It's really neat, and that's one of the biggest attributes that I like about any Green Lantern for that matter.
That's great. Now there's a lot of members of the Corps, so I'm going to put you on the spot. Who's your favorite, alien or human? Doesn't matter.
Geez, I really was a fan of Sodom Yacht, and I've tried to go through back issues, but I can't seem to locate where he's at anymore, and he hasn't been around, and nobody's included him in many issues. As far as my Earth Lantern goes, I mean, I've always been a true diehard Hal Jordan fan, but Jessica Cruz is really starting to creep up on him. I really enjoy her character.
Cool. So this is your first episode. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about. We're going to do some news and notes here in a couple minutes, and then we're going to talk about Green Lanterns 45 through 47, the Ghost of the Past arc, and then we're going to talk about the Green Lanterns annual, and then we're going to throw our first thing out to the listeners for their input on a new segment. So let's take a quick break, and as soon as we get done and come back, we'll start talking about some Green Lantern news.
This is Salak, Green Lantern of Sector 1418, and you are receiving the podcast of OA.
The podcast of OA.
So, Phil, we've got some Green Lantern news. I don't know how much you've been following it on the internet, but have you heard the Grant Morrison rumors on Green Lantern?
I have. I've been reading little tidbits of it that have popped up on my Twitter feed, and I've been interesting. I mean, the guy's a great writer.
Well, it first showed up on Bleeding Cool. I was at a convention a couple weekends ago and ran into someone who currently writes for DC Comics that I was very familiar with, and the individual and I were talking, and he started asking me what I thought of the Green Lantern books today and that kind of thing. And one thing led to another, and he kind of looked at me and he goes, well, you know who's coming, right? And I go, well, yeah. And he basically confirmed to me that it's Grant Morrison is indeed coming back and taking over the Green Lantern franchise. And, you know, knowing Grant Morrison and his writing pace, it's not going to be a twice-a-month book. It's going to be a once-a-month book.
He's a pretty controversial writer. I'll give him that. But the only thing that I was going to question about that is he's been around for a long time. Has he written Green Lantern before, or does he have any backstory of any Lantern titles?
He has not written Green Lantern per se. You know, he wrote Final Crisis, so there's some exposure there. Probably his biggest exposure to the Green Lantern mythology was he wrote Justice League when Kyle Rayner was a part of the Justice League during that era when Kyle was the only Green Lantern.
Oh, I remember that. You're right. That was back in the 90s?
Yeah, yep. That was like the mid to late 90s. So he's got some exposure. It'll be interesting. You know, the funny thing is this individual and I looked at each other and we were like, well, it all depends on which version of Grant Morrison shows up. Is it the guy who can tell very good, straightforward superhero stories, or is it the guy that likes to leave out a lot of detail and leave it to the reader to figure out? And that'll be kind of the big tale. Now, what's interesting is, and this didn't come from the person I talked to, but the rumor is that the book is going to be Hal-centric. It's going to be tied into the whole DC Metal story in the upcoming potential death of the multiverse, and that it's going to be called Green Lantern. And so, with knowing that Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps is ending with issue 50 and Hal is showing up in Green Lanterns, the conjecture is that Dan Jurgens is writing Green Lanterns to position the characters for where Grant Morrison is going to take it, and then Green Lanterns will be canceled, and then they're going to relaunch a solo Green Lantern book. So the $1 million question is what happens to Simon and Jessica and John and Kyle and Guy. And kind of the leading contemplation at this point is that, well, John's going to be in Justice League.
Yeah,
and
he's going over to Justice League. I saw that. Yeah.
Yep. And Jessica's going to be on Justice League Odyssey.
That'd be an excellent book. I can't wait for that. I can't wait for the Justice League Dark title. That's going to be really good.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to those. And then, of course, if Hal's in the Green Lantern book, it kind of leaves Kyle and Guy with nowhere to go. And maybe that's a temporary thing while they reset the Green Lantern universe. I don't know. You know, nobody really knows the long-range goals. I was kind of thinking they were going to show some of that stuff when the solicitations came out for the August books, which of course they didn't. So it's still very much in the air. But I do put a lot of credibility in the person I talked to. Now, the person could have been pulling my chain to promote the rumor, but it does sound like Grant Morrison is going to be doing a Green Lantern book, which is kind of exciting.
It is really exciting. I really like him. But I guess the bigger question would be, I wonder if he's going to start doing more with Kyle Rayner. I mean, he wrote Kyle. You said he wrote Kyle Rayner a lot. He knows the character somewhat. So I wonder if he'll make him a more prominent character. I mean, he's gotten kind of a lot of he's been in the background a lot of these issues lately.
Yeah, you know, I was hoping when Kyle was in the Omega, the Omega Men book.
Yeah, that was a great book.
I was hoping they were going to pick up on that more, and they kind of abandoned Kyle being a White Lantern and actually having a White Lantern Corps, and then they kind of dropped it.
Yeah, that's kind of how I felt with his character. Actually, I kind of felt like that following, that's way back after Brightest Day. I mean, he just kind of like flailed around a little bit and everything, and they never did really hash out a lot of his character, and it'd be neat to read some more about him. I mean, I wasn't a huge fan of Kyle Rayner all my life, but the 90s I was in my teenage years, so I was reading Justice League and all those titles, and I was even reading the Kyle Rayner led book. And while he wasn't my favorite, he was still a cool guy. You know, he was still a great Lantern.
Yeah, it seems like they've kind of lost their way with what to do with Kyle now that he's no longer kind of the new guy trying to live up to the mantle of somebody else. They've kind of struggled with finding a direction. I've enjoyed I enjoyed the story in the Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps book between him and Soren Natu.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, I love that. I was not crazy about the Carol Ferris Guy Gardner hookup. That I thought was really forced.
I completely agree with you. And it feels like they don't even know what to do with Carol Ferris at this point, because she's been flailing around too here and there.
Yeah, they keep teasing, Hal talking to her. There was that one scene several issues ago where Hal is on Earth and he's on Carol's doorstep ready to say something, and then John says, "Oh, sorry, you got to come back." So I kind of hope they do something with her. But if this story with Grant Morrison is what it sounds like it's going to be, if this is really the truth, this looks like it's going to be Hal on his own. Now, I'd love to see maybe it be a Hal-Carol team-up book. That would be kind of interesting.
That'd be really interesting. I'd read that. That'd be great. I'd like some stuff about the Zamrons. I think that would be interesting to hash some more of that out, too. And it was really, really good when Green Lantern in the animated series was produced with Giancoli, I think his name was. When they included parts in there about the Star Sapphires. And I thought it was great. I mean, it was just, I like reading more about them, the different lights on the Lantern side. But, of course, you can't produce all those titles, you know what I mean? Not everybody wants to read them all.
Yeah, we kind of were at that point for a while, and then it was kind of like the air came out of the balloon. Right. So we'll see where it goes. But, the other big piece of Green Lantern-related news comes out of the pages of Doomsday Clock. And for a lot of people, this book has been hit or miss, but the most recent issue came out this past week, issue number 5. And in this issue, Johnny Thunder showed up in the DC Rebirth number 0 book that Jeff Johns did. And he shows up here again. And in this issue, he is in search of a light. And he mentions Alan's lost. Well, at the end of the issue, they find Alan Scott's power battery in Pittsburgh.
See, and it's great that they should bring him back. They really did well with that character, and when the Earth 2 title was being made. You remember that book?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, and that was a great book. I loved him. I thought they did great with Alan Scott. And then after that book ended, they didn't do anything with him, did they?
No, they didn't. And what's interesting about this is the Lantern is the Golden Age-looking Lantern.
Right.
So, they've been saying that this book is going to lead to the return of the JSA. Well, we've got Johnny Thunder. We're now getting, hints that that Alan is lost and his lantern has something to do with it. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I'm kind of looking forward to it. I kind of wonder, there was a story years and years and years ago about, I think, Hal saving people inside of his power ring or inside of his lantern. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if the JSA was trapped inside of Alan Scott's power battery? Oh,
that would be a really, really interesting story arc.
So, we'll see what happens. I know the Doomsday Clock book has, like I said, been hit or miss for a lot of people, but if for anything, this particular issue kind of piqued my curiosity and makes me far more interested in the story than I have been.
Well, and I wonder if they're gearing something up for Alan Scott in the long term, you know what I mean? But I wonder, again, that's going to come up with where they're going to fit him in with all these lanterns floating around.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, if the rumors are that they're going to bring back the JSA, then I'd love to see a JSA book. If it's set in modern times, it'll be interesting to see what they do. Who knows where this is all going to lead? This whole, the bringing the Watchmen universe into the DC universe, there's so much potential for how this could shake things up. But I think the last thing DC really wants to do is to do another air quote relaunch.
Right. No, we don't need another one of those. I mean, everybody gets tired of those after a while,
Definitely. Well, Phil, let's take a quick break, and then we'll start talking about Green Lanterns 45 through 47.
All right, sounds good.
So, Phil, we want to start talking about Green Lanterns. We haven't covered that book on the show for quite a while. So let's jump to the Ghost of the Past arc, which was, I think earlier I said issues 45 to 47, but it's actually 44 to 47. This is Tim Seeley's last arc. So I'm going to ask you, because you mentioned that Jessica Cruz is one of your favorite characters. What did you think about this particular story?
Okay, so I mean, a lot of Jessica Cruz's backstory comes from, I think she started it with that tease from Jeff Johns back in Forever Evil. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, right. So, but a lot of her character, a lot of her flaws have never really been hashed out. I mean, I don't know who all reads the book, and I don't know how many people are really big fans of her, but a lot of it has to do with her anxieties, and of course, we never really came up against a Green Lantern that had such an internal fear of anxiety. So where this one starts out, Green Lantern 44, it kind of opens up, and where she's in this therapy session, and it focuses on this. It goes to this backstory where she's in the woods or whatnot, and talks about the story about her friends getting murdered, if I remember correctly, on a hunting trip or whatnot. She later on, she meets up in this, whatever this flashback is, when she's going into herself with Simon Baz, and he informs her that Singularity Jane has been located on the world or whatnot. Now, I'm not familiar with that character, not a lot. I don't know how much you know about her yourself.
She was in that one arc. She's fairly a new character, and it was interesting. It looked like Tim Seeley created her just for this moment.
Right, it must be. I mean, apparently she's supposed to be some kind of master manipulator or whatnot. So, and then of course, towards the end of the first book, it's basically just a telling of Jessica Cruz going into herself, and I guess, and battling her inner demons or whatnot. The thing that I'm concerned about with Jessica Cruz's character is Tim Seeley seems like he's investing a lot of time in writing into herself, and I'm kind of wondering where they're going to go with the character, because as you and I keep talking about, we don't know where they're going to fit all these lanterns in and what titles or whatnot. So there's going to have to be a central core place for her to develop, and you had mentioned she's going to be an Odyssey, which will be interesting because she'll be without Simon Baz, and Simon Baz has been an integral part of this team up since the book started.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think it does the character a lot of justice to put her in a team book, because how much time is she going to get to develop as a character? What I thought was interesting, I was reading an interview with Tim Seeley, and he was talking about this is the story that he set out to want to write in the first place. So you can kind of see where he's been building up to this. It was interesting to see how confident Jessica is in the flashbacks prior to the death of her friends. Here she is on a hunting trip, of all things.
Right, that's a really good point. I didn't really consider that, but that's a really good point.
I love the line in issue 45 where they refer to her as a Latina Legolas. But yeah, it's interesting because you see how she seems to be managing herself much better. And part of me, when I was reading this whole arc, I thought, gosh, if they get her to resolution, will that alter the character? Because it, like you said, it's been so much a part of her core essence since we as readers have been introduced to her. But here we see her in a life that I think if you looked at Jessica now and you were to look at this backwards life she has, I don't think anybody would have ever expected her to be a conservationist who hunts and tracks animals and even shoots animals. It's not anything I ever would have pictured for Jessica.
No, you're completely right. And to further that, if you look back at her character when she was first coming on the screen, she had a lot of embattlement with Power Ring, which was from Earth 2. Earth 2? Is that Earth 3? Power Ring's from
Earth 3. Yep, Earth 3.
Right. So she had a lot of embattlement with Power Ring, and oddly enough, when I'm reading a lot of these arcs, it's kind of funny how much of Power Ring still exists within her, even in how she acts or whatnot, if you've read anything to do with Power Ring or whatnot.
Right. It's funny because I remember when they made Jessica Green Lantern, I was saying to myself, and I think I mentioned it in the podcast, that I thought Jessica was a more interesting character as Power Ring simply because you had the ring being a personification of her anxiety, and it always put her down.
And it would have made a great alternative kind of spin on the Green Lantern Corps. You got Power Ring as a kind of a special thing, kind of like an Ion, right? Or Parallax for that matter. They're a special entity into itself, and the Power Ring one would have been good to keep that around.
Yeah, I kind of thought that the The interesting thing about that would be is that if Jessica continued to try to strive to overcome the downside of being Power Ring and the ring trying to corrupt her, that would have been an easier to write or an easier to read version of somebody battling their inner demons.
Sure.
Where I've sometimes struggled with the Jessica Cruz character has been when, on one hand, one minute she's saving the universe, and on the other hand, somebody shows up with a cowboy hat and she freaks out. It's been a little hard for me to deal with on occasion. But for me, Power Ring would have made it more palatable. But I think this is an interesting journey. I think this, if anything, I feel bad for anybody who really is a Simon Baz fan, because it always seems like Simon gets the short end of the stick.
He's going to end up with it at the end of this series. I mean, he's going over to, well, no, he's not going over any other titles, is he? They don't know where he's going.
Right. If he's going anywhere.
If he's going anywhere. I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to diss on Simon Baz. I mean, he's been a cool character, but I never did like him from the get-go. And, well, I didn't understand why they first introduced him with the guns, and then later on he's not synonymous with the guns anymore. And it's like, okay, why change that about him? But to go back to the very beginning, I wasn't really a big fan of him when he came out. So sorry for any of the Simon Baz fans out there.
Well, I feel the same way. I didn't like this whole Emerald Sight thing and the ability to heal people. It just seems like, okay, we've got to pump somebody up and make them special rather than let them earn that over time. They're trying to rush it.
Well, it's just like, let's throw some special abilities at this guy and see if anybody picks up on the fact that it makes him more popular. And if not, well, okay, we'll go to round 2 or whatever.
And I think that's where it's headed. But this arc, I think, is Tim Seeley's strongest work on the title.
Tim Seeley's been great, and he really knows he really knows a lot of good Lantern lore, and he develops good Lantern stuff too, especially when we move on to the annuals, when we start talking about that. It's really interesting what kind of stuff he brings into the whole Lantern mythos.
Yeah, it was interesting to see that Jessica comes out of this whole thing stronger for it, I think, and it'll be interesting to see how her character acts going forward, because she does come out of it knowing at least visibly what the murderers look like, and she's going to now seek out justice for her friends. And then you get that very ominous thing at the end of the last issue there, where the Guardians are talking to Hal, and they're like, we can't have somebody rewriting the ring, and he's coming to Earth basically to take her power ring away. Right.
Which I wonder if that's the way they're gonna spin in the relationship between them two characters. I don't know. I think them two teamed up would be an interesting pairing for a while.
It could be interesting. It'd be interesting to see Hal being a mentor like he was to her in Justice League when she had Power Ring and he was there trying to help her out. One of the things that was really cool about this arc was how Tim Seeley did the flashback to Green Lantern number 20, Jeff Johns' last issue. I don't know if you caught that, Phil, but
I don't think I caught that.
Oh, there's the scene at the end of Green Lantern number 20 where you see kind of the futures of all the different characters. And they talk about Simon Baz, and there's a scene between him and Jessica Cruz, and him trying to talk Jessica Cruz down, and that panel is lifted and redrawn in the last issue, in issue 47.
I completely missed that. Wow, you're right. That's really neat.
So I thought it was cool. It'll be interesting to see where this franchise goes. It was surprising that Tim Seeley was off this book so quickly. He didn't even get a chance to write the annual.
No. He didn't, and that's sad too, because his writing's really been strong with this title. Is he now? I wonder if he's going to be moving on. Is he moving on to another title? Do you know of, or?
He is. I can't remember what the name of the book is, but yeah, he's moving to a different book. And it was funny because Dan Jurgens doesn't take over until issue 50. So issues 48 and 49 are going to be written by someone else as a filler.
That's sad. Man, it bothers me when they do that kind of stuff.
It seems really weird. So we'll see. But an interesting arc. Why don't we'll take another break and we'll come back and let's talk about that Green Lanterns annual.
That's a good one. I like that one. Sounds good.
This is Robert Vendetti, and you're listening to the podcast of OA.
the podcast. I am Mr. Bova. You can call me Phil. We're going to tackle Green Lantern Annual, written by Mr. Andy Diggle. Love him. Great writer. So this one picks up where we left off in the Ghosts of the Past arc, and we find Simon and Jessica. Now, have you read this, Myron?
Yeah, I did read it.
Okay, right. So we find them in the hope I pronounce this right. Vikaea system. Does that sound cool enough?
Close enough. I don't know how it's pronounced either.
I want to sound cool, I got to sound cool with the lantern stuff. So Vikaea system, and they're tracking down what looks like this lost lantern character. Now this is a newly created character, if I read correctly, right?
Yeah, yep, brand new.
Right. So they get to the planet, and of course the planet. I love the guy they come up across. This guy named Yili Lachua. Did I say that right?
I think so.
Right. So they come up against this guy, this master of ceremonies is what he's known for, and his name's Yili Lachua, and he's the last survivor of this Wikaean people. And the great thing about this is the human flaw. Okay, so we have these Earth Lanterns, Baz and Jessica showing up, and these guys got a strict code of law on behavior and etiquette. And I mean, if anybody knows anybody, us humans are nothing but if not unetiquette, right?
Right.
So we go back and forth between. Let's see, we got Cruz and Baz, and now both of these characters are supposed to inevitably give a big, huge speech to this assembly or whatnot of all these Wikaean people. And I guess to make a long story short, these Wikaean people must have. I don't know. Do you think they lost their sight, or do you think they lost hope in the Green Lantern itself?
It looked like in the flashbacks that we see later in the issue that the Green Lantern code of how they operate was in conflict with how this society functioned, and so they put the unknown Lantern in a position where he had to choose between.
He had to sacrifice himself, right?
Yeah, basically, he kept put in a position where he had to choose between his Green Lantern oath and his people, and he was basically forced to imprison his own people, and in doing so, ends up actually saving them all.
Right. And at this assembly, the one thing I want to point out about this is Simon Baz's speech at that assembly. I thought it was, he talks a lot throughout a lot of his books, but this is the first time I've actually felt like he talked really, really true. I don't know if there was something about it that he was giving a speech to these characters or not, but it just felt like he was really, really speaking the truth for the first time in his characterization. And I don't know if you picked up on that, and there was an issue, or it was on page 13, I think.
Yeah, I think he's he's often in a position where he has a guard up around himself, and this was a case where he was able to be his honest, true self in a place where he felt like he needed to. He couldn't BS his way through anything. And
he really was, and it showed a lot of leadership qualities when he did that. And it was really interesting. But then, of course, on the obverse, we get Jessica Cruz, who comes up, and she botches the whole thing, unfortunately. But again, this reflects back to her character and this whole anxiety she has. I mean, she's not really a leader per se, and to me, it felt like her being in that position to have to speak to a bunch of people didn't even fit her character.
Yeah, I think it was difficult for her as a character. This is something I never would have thought she would be able to do. And to me, that was why I kind of thought, well, does this story take place before or after Ghost of the Past? Because I didn't see the confidence that we kind of saw at the end of that last issue.
Exactly, and I thought maybe she would have hit a home run on that speech, but of course it got boggled. And of course she takes flight, tries to disappear for a while. And then, of course, she comes up against, I guess, is the Ancient Lantern, right? I guess if that's, for lack of a better word, it's the Ancient Lantern itself.
Yeah, she comes across basically a place where the Lost Lantern had preserved themselves, and it was basically kind of covered with the remnants of the planet after it blew up.
Right.
And so she she encounters a stasis chamber and helps the lantern inside get free and free his people, essentially.
Now, the coolest part about that was the fact of her rebooting herself, or rebooting the ring.
Yeah, doing the back OS, doing like a downgrade.
Right. So she's trapped in this chamber, which is kind of like a will chamber, I guess if you will. And so it's like an ancient ring. So her newer technology can't speak to the ancient technology. So she asks her ring to reboot itself, to downgrade itself to an earlier version of the, I guess you could call it willpower OS system.
Right, which I don't know. I wasn't sure quite how to feel about that.
I don't know how you can do that. I didn't even think that could be done.
Well, yeah, that was kind of my thing. Is like, well, is this even possible? I mean, okay, I can understand maybe not being backwards compatible, but for the ring to be able to reboot itself and reprogram itself, it seemed a little, I don't know, a little odd to me. That and there were two things about this issue that bugged me, and that was one of them. And the other one was the fact that the stasis chamber had been ring powered for eons by a power ring that couldn't hold a charge long enough to do that. So I was left scratching my head in a couple places, and those were those two places.
Right. And the guy that was in the inner chamber, in the inner chamber.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the web. Okay, I got you.
Yeah, that whole stasis chamber had been operating for eons based on his power ring. And I'm like, well, it should have run out of juice somewhere along the way. And it was weird. The other thing I thought was weird was this unknown lantern, this lost lantern, we never do get his name.
No, they never did give his name. I was looking for that just now. I was flipping back and forth. I was like, man, that's right. They didn't give his name in here. So it was interesting, though, he sacrificed himself. But the cool part about him was that he was willing to face the consequences for his actions, and that showed a good true form of character with him.
Yeah.
And then of course they let him off retroactively. He's already time served, and then they let him go. And then at the end they have a big party, a big karaoke party. It looks like.
yeah. It was a little interesting there. I honestly felt that this story wasn't as strong as Ghosts of the Past.
No, well, I think it was because of the change in writers. Seeley's got more depth than Diggle, I think.
Yeah, I almost wish that Ghosts of the Past had been collected and turned into the annual, and this could have been a 1 or 2 issue story easily. I think it would have been better. You know, when I think of an annual, I always think of like this is going to be a big story, and I didn't feel like this was a big story after finishing that last arc, which I thought was so pivotal.
Well, and not only that, I felt like they made this last Lantern character out to be like a subpar character. You know,
Yeah.
If you're a Lantern, if anybody reads Green Lantern, it's like the first Lantern when that story arc started. I mean, everybody was intrigued by it because he was the first Lantern, and then you have this guy who's a lost Lantern. I mean, there was no intriguing value with him whatsoever, besides that he sacrificed himself, and then he decided to plead guilty to basically charges I thought were pointless anyway.
right. And I didn't like how John and Hal came off looking in this book, where they were kind of felled by some tentacles. I mean, these are two guys that have gone toe to toe with the New Gods, and they get felled by some tentacles.
Right. So anyway, it was a good book. I like Jessica, but I read it for. Sometimes I try not to pay attention to Baz when I'm reading these books. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense.
Because I just want to learn more about her, and I feel like the best part of her isn't suited with him. I think the best part of her is yet to come, and I don't think it's going to be found with Simon Baz. I think for something about his character, they may mesh well, but I don't think they're meant to be partners. Does that make sense? I don't know if you're feeling that or not, but that's kind of how I've gotten their relationships over it, even though they've gotten along.
Yeah, I have often felt in this book that Simon is usually taking a back seat to Jessica, and at that point, I realize she needs to have a foil or someone to play off of. But if we're going to put all the energy into developing her character, let's just do that.
Yeah, exactly.
But so those were the books for this week. So let's take a quick break. You and I have some ideas for some new things we want to add to the show, and we want to get the listeners' input. So let's take a quick break and come back, and then we'll talk about that.
Sounds great.
What up, dweebs? This is Guy Gardner. You're listening to the podcast of OA.
And welcome back. So Phil and I have been talking, this is kind of a new era. This is basically the podcast of OA Rebirth, if you will. And, Phil and I have a considerable history with the characters. We thought, what would our listeners like to hear us talk about when we're not talking about new books? And so we've been tossing around some ideas. One idea is maybe to do flashback reviews of old stories that maybe had a lot of impact on us, or stories that had a lot of impact on our listeners that they'd like to hear us talk about. And another idea is maybe to talk about some Green Lantern characters that, some of the lesser known characters, and give people some kind of a mini biography of sorts. So what we'd like to do is we would like to hear from you folks as to what you'd like us to do. And maybe you'd like us to do more than one thing. Maybe you'd like us to talk about different things. Maybe I want us to rotate between the two. So I'm going to put a poll up on our Facebook page and on Twitter for people to give feedback. And if you don't have access to one of those two things, you can always send us an email. And the email address is mrumsey@blogofoa.com. Or call and leave us a voicemail on our voicemail line, which is 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. And that'll give you the opportunity to leave about a 1-minute voicemail. And let us know what you'd like us to talk about, because I'd like us to do some things other than constantly talking about new books. But we'd like to hear from you guys what you'd like us to do.
Well, and I also think for the average listener, I'm not sure how far back they go with their Lantern reading. You know what I mean? A lot of times, from what I've gathered over people that I've talked to, they usually start at Jeff Johns' Rebirth, and that's usually the starting point, which was 2005. I mean, we got some stuff that goes way back. Look at the Dark Stars. They're starting to bring back the Dark Stars, and they were mentioned well before Rebirth.
Oh yeah.
So it'd be nice for us to provide their listeners with some more focus and information. That way they can delve further into some of this stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I think for a lot of people, they picked up the book when they did the whole Green Lantern relaunch back with Green Lantern Rebirth, and a lot of them don't know necessarily some of the backstories of some of these characters. So when you see a character like Rotlot Fan show up in Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps, people like us are geeking out because it's a character we're familiar with, and for a lot of people, that's brand new. So I think if we can provide some old information or highlight some old stories that maybe people want to go back and read, if they can find them in back issue bins or in collected issues, that might be of value. Or maybe there's some other ideas out there.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be cool to open up segments for whatever. I mean, they could even email whatever they have ideas for, or something that they want to hear about specifically. We're open to a lot of stuff, Myron, and I'm really looking forward to moving forward with the podcast and seeing if we can gain some new listeners and new ideas from them.
Absolutely. So if you've got some ideas, use some of those aforementioned ways to get a hold of us. And there's always, if you forget any of those things, if you go to the blogofoa.com and click on the contact page, you can send us a message that way too. But we would really like to hear from you guys and see what your ideas are and combine them with our own.
Exactly.
My name is John Mayo.
And I'm Bob Retall.
What is the Weekly Comics Spotlight?
Comics reviews from two fans with 65 years of combined comics reading experience,
who each get and read well over 100 different comics each month from Marvel, DC, and a wide variety of independent publishers.
Reviews that highlight books that may not hit everyone's radar screen since most people don't buy so many different comics each month.
Reviews with honest opinions. We enjoy comics but realize not every issue that we read is a solid gold masterpiece. All in about 30 minutes. So please check out the Weekly Comics Spotlight at www.comicbookpage.com/podcast.
So, Phil, this wraps up your first episode of the podcast. Was it as daunting as you thought it was going to be?
I was a little bit more nervous than I originally thought. And sometimes when you're talking to somebody sitting at a coffee shop or sitting across from you at the table and you're talking about a book, a lot of times it's engaging and it's really the conversation flows. But sometimes when you're not talking to the person sitting in front of you and you're talking to a computer and you're by yourself in your house, it's a little nerve-wracking, but it's fine. It's all in good fun, and I loved it and I enjoyed it.
Well, great. I'm glad. And I hope you'll stick around. I hope we didn't scare you off with the first episode.
No. I hope I'll stick around for as long as you'll have me and as long as the listeners can deal with me, I guess.
Well, we should be back in a couple of weeks. So between now and then, keep your power rings charged, be good to each other, and make every day your brightest day. Take care, guys. The Podcast of OA is the official podcast of the blog of OA and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. Skype users can leave a voicemail on the show's account, Blog of OA. Send your emails to greenlantern@stny.rr.com. You can also find the blog and podcast of OA on Facebook and Google+. Green Lantern and other related characters are copyrighted by DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The blog of OA and the podcast of OA are both fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.